This presentation is for Rural Agricultural Health and Safety for the class in Nursing in Rural America for the BSN program at OPSU, created by Christy Neely, RN. Rural Agricultural and Health Safety. As a nurse, I choose this topic for the following reasons. I live and work in Henrietta, Oklahoma, and the agricultural population makes up the majority of the area. And I have already begun applying rural nursing interventions in the care I provide in my community. Needs for this population include health professionals being familiar with side effects and treatments of pesticide poisoning used in the area. A great way to identify those is to research the common crops grown in the area. We also have educating on the common agricultural injuries in children and ways to prevent them, such as wearing the proper footwear while being outdoors. We also educate on general farm safety for all those who are involved in the agricultural population. All of these can be found at agricultural safety at the CDC site. Common goals for this population include identifying and educating this population for the identified risks. Characteristics for this population include working long hours, not seeking care for treatment for fear of missing out on income during harvesting season. Their preferences are to work as much as possible, so they sometimes don't recognize the signs and symptoms of fatigue or heat exhaustion. Their values in agriculture are a hard work ethic, so they sometimes just don't pay attention to those symptoms showing. Cultural adaptations and values for these preferences, understanding the values and preferences of the agricultural population, and considering life experiences that you might be able to use in scenarios to help create that treatment care plan for these patients. Strategies for this population. Explaining health topics in a manner this population relates to. Like I said, scenarios and relating them to their lifestyle, that, it fits their lifestyle and their habits. Cognitive adaptation. This means changing your language and using layman's terms and integrating their level of education into their interventions. A lot of them are undereducated. They dropped school at an early age and decided to just work primarily in the fields or with their cattle. But there are quite a few now that have degrees and are pretty well versed, where you can increase that level of education for their interventions. Motivational adaptations for agricultural. You have to consider their gender, their ethnic race, their religious, and their socioeconomic backgrounds. Most often the gender for this population is male, but recently there has been a rise in the females who are in this field as well. Considerations you have to take into effect is that sometimes men can have more side effects than women can have with pesticide poisonings. The religious beliefs also play a role. You have to remember your education on if this religion will receive blood, and all of our religious teachings play a role in their treatment and care plans. You also have to consider their socioeconomic background and if they can afford the things that are being prescribed and if they can get to the places where they need to have this care completed. Environmental adaptations, ecological aspects of the community. For example, implementing home care instead of at a clinic if it's too hard for them to get to the clinic. If they just live too far out, sometimes that in-home care can be more beneficial. Sometimes those supplies might be difficult to come by for their income reasons or because of accessibility. Home health services may be beneficial in that instance as well. Adaptions for program content is tailoring your language, using visuals, examples and scenarios, and also activities. These will help get across the plan of care, what interventions are going to be used, and how we're going to evaluate them. It helps to increase compliance when these interventions are successful and we can evaluate those outcomes. Using language this population is familiar with also helps in understanding and using those scenarios and examples. Adaptions of program form. You're going to need to alter your program structure and goals, which have potential to reduce program effectiveness. But adapting to the program structure, it can be necessary, but interventions should be appropriately adjusted so not to alter that outcome. You can change up those interventions to non-traditional, but they still need to have the same outcomes. Cultural adaptations, you may need to adapt relating to language and learning. Many might only know a few words of English. We have a lot of Hispanic culture now, and sometimes you have to just make sure they're understanding that care that you're going to be providing and what your goals are and outcomes. Understanding that traditional treatments may need to be unconventional to fit their lifestyles. For instance, they might need to have IV antibiotics and they don't want to be at the hospital for that, so we might implement home care to come out and administer those or do some patient teaching. Evaluating the outcomes might be non-traditional, but we still want the outcomes to remain the same. When implementation for agricultural populations come into play, the nurse-patient relationship with community partners and just giving them a good idea of, hey, these people are great, you can go here for this treatment or this need. Recruitment and supervision of staff, you want to try to get as many that are well versed in the agricultural population and supervise that staff and make sure that they are evaluating those goals and outcomes. Your staff retention will increase with the right supervision and continuing to make sure they're trained and well educated on common areas of treatment that these patients come in for. You also have to be sure about liability when we make these traditional interventions non-traditional. You have to make sure you're not crossing that liability line. Implementing challenges, creating care plans that fit within their agricultural populations and can be a little bit challenging related to their preferences and lifestyles, but it is possible. Educating of treatments can be challenging with this population related to education barriers, language barriers, and that level of medical education. Potential study designs. There's ones that come all together I have a nice picture to the right, and it starts you from the top and goes to the other. Meta-analysis, systemic reviews, random controlled trials, because you don't want all the time the same ones. You want to be able to mix it up within that population. Placebo-controlled trials, because you want to make sure that they're not just thinking that it's working when it's really not. Pragmatic trials, crossover trials, Zelens designs, and comprehensive cohort studies. Potential framework, decrease in time consumption for data retrieval can be decreased by selecting the amount of agricultural population you're going to do this research on. You don't want to try to do a wide array of this population and take too long to be able to get that data analysis. Sustainable strategies, continuing strong leadership with the program, broadcasting success to key entities and audiences. You want to make sure that the people who are within this population know that there is risk, there are treatments, and care plan interventions for specific issues they come across in the agricultural population. Two potential funding partners are the National Institute of Health. They play a big role. Their website does great with educating on the agricultural standards, and the Denali Commission as well. Methods of dissemination. Posters placed in common areas that this population occupies can increase that knowledge of any potential or common things that are common in this population. Making presentations to groups in the local communities for this population also gets the word out there that, hey, this is specifically for this population. Your audience, the best audience for this population is the agricultural population, people in the cattle industry and farming and harvesting, and community leaders that may help with funding and carrying out the publication of that information to make sure it's reaching the right audience. Here are the references used throughout this presentation. Each one of them is great with their information that they provide, and I have extremely enjoyed this class. Like I said, I've already started implementing these learnings that I've learned in this class, and I feel like it's going to play a big role in providing care for the people in my community. I have really enjoyed this class.